This is Jeremy Zwinger with the Rice Trader, just giving your TRT April 8th update. What can I say about this week? It's been a little bit interesting, yet a little bit slow. The market remains very concerned about what's happening. The demand being down significantly on the year, lack of trades overall, lack of action, just to keep the market spicy. And for Asia, really, you're looking at already 10% down for the first quarter, which is just a major issue in a market that has pretty good crops carried in. So we're just seeing a lot of interesting action and concern growing that the crops are big, demand is just being weak, and you're kind of seeing it universally, whether that's in the U.S., whether that's in Asia. There is concern for demand, which has kind of fought this out with some prices going up the last few weeks, some prices going down. It's just a very, very fascinating time for the market with very, very high world supplies, as we very much highlighted. High wheat supplies, high grain supplies, high soybean supplies, of soybean actually being the worst. If you look at the stocks, it's dramatic, and why you're seeing such amazing weakness on the price. So it's overall, a very fascinating market, weak for sure. What else are we seeing? Iraq definitely got booked this week. The talk is of just 60,000 tons to Brazil. Teriyaki is said to have won at 549 per metric ton CIF FO. So there was cheaper offers from Thailand. It's a bit of a surprise. Thailand really should have won the tender if it was priced / quality based. I'm a bit surprised on the Brazilian getting it. They definitely had the America's best price. It'll be interesting to see what the quality is. And what else are we seeing? Iraq is floating a tender. We'll see what happens there. They obviously are in need of some rice. It's going to be cheap, low quality for sure, which is very interesting. We do see the Australians floating themselves on the Australian Stock Exchange. They're looking for $20–30 million of business. That'll be very interesting to see what happens on Monday and how quickly that is booked, where it opens at. I'll surely be watching it myself. Lots of other things too. What I said this week, and for those who are able to see it, I gave a webinar for about an hour and a half, much longer than this short video, where I talked about the world rice market, and I gave a lot of these points. For those who want to see the longer version of this, of my thoughts on the world market, we will put those links in this week's TRT just so you can see. It definitely got very extensive, showing the global stock, showing the China issue, and really highlighting a lot of these points. And one of the key highlights was just that there's so many rices in the world. There's just so much going on. There's so many new offers, whether it be from Cambodia or China, which is offsetting some of the interest with the Philippines opening, with other things happening. For sure the market's being destabilized, especially like China. So that's enough of me just talking. You guys don't want to hear Jeremy go on and on. I'm going to show my screen. We're going to talk a little bit about the TRT in person, and just kind of go through. As always, this is the executive summary. I know many of you quite enjoy this. I'm going to try to keep it not too small so we can see the video. And what do we see through the TRT? I always suggest for those that are extremely busy to continue to go through and look at the summaries of each section and look at what's happening. For those out there, this is the TRT versus USDA week, a very important week where we really look and go in depth what we see demand is, where we think the year is going. Definitely take a look at that. It definitely gives a highlight of what we're seeing in world trade and a lot of these key highlight points. I'm just going to run to one of my favorite graphs right now, and then before I go back up and talk about some key pieces. As many of you know, this is probably my favorite, one of my favorite, if not the favorite graph. It does highlight the trade in a snapshot, and I like it especially because we're done with the first quarter. Obviously these are non-official. We update this with official data as we're able to get it, usually about a month behind, but it does show a dramatic first quarter. Extremely slow, obviously one of the slowest first quarters I show on record. The U.S. is even worse in that they were down 19% last year and are down even again this year. So the U.S. is really struggling, but overall demand is going to struggle. The one thing I can tell you is that I would expect Vietnam to have an amazing second quarter when their prices dipped to 320, 330. Demand was just exceptional. And you'll see that in the shippings and arrivals that occur in this next quarter, probably April, May, deliveries, in fact. definitely heavy bookings occurred, which brought prices back up. So definitely take a look at this. I mean, it is a snapshot of the trade, but one I watch very closely. And of course, each week we definitely look at the prices of what you saw. Again, Thailand move up, Pakistan move down, and India really move up with very little other changes. I mean, a little bit of movement in Vietnam, but overall a rather slow week. The trade's kind of trying to figure out the direction. We do have a massive premium for the U.S. material. And, as I gave the speech this week for the University of Arkansas, I'm very concerned about the U.S. In fact, they could end up having to pull down prices dramatically. They didn't get Iraq, which is probably going to pull down the futures market. It looks like the dryness is going to allow planting, so you're going to have good supplies. You have some of the highest carry in history, so they're carrying a big amount with low demand. And then this year's demand looks very negative. So while there was some hope that maybe the lower Brazilian crop or other things would allow the U.S. some opportunity, these higher prices and quality concerns are just killing demand. You've seen it in Mexico, where they've gone from 99% market share to about 60%. This is a big deal. And there's just not a lot of movement. And at the same time, you're seeing some very good actions from our Latin American and South American players to take over markets, including importing the U.S. As we stated previous weeks, Thailand alone has imported 500,000 tons in the U.S. in 2018. So the U.S. is specifically having a very difficult time in the current market, as we will have shown. What else can we see? As I go through the sections, I always do look, and of course we have the monthly Thai export update, which gives us official data. And there's great graphs in here, especially for those who are very active in this market. It's a time to reassess your views and to really look at the trade. I, of course, like the end table. It's my favorite, where you actually get the chance to look at the exact data, look at what's happening by region. We have much more precise data than we show here. We keep it very private. It's long-term data. We just try to show the key intellectual thoughts. That on the year, if you look through January alone, Thailand was only down just 1%. But if you look through the first quarter, obviously they're off significantly. That just showed the higher prices in Thailand really limited sales in February and March. And probably now it's limiting the ability to export, being so much higher than Vietnam. 400 versus 360 is a huge margin to cover, even as good as the Thais are. So what else is critical? I mean, there is some key things going on in every market, which you can look at both the top and really, as this graph shows, this is a tiny amount of exports from the U.S. It's the worst since 1997. It just shows the problems occurring here. This was a very big crop, in fact. And to have that level of trade in 2018, it's definitely affecting the psychology. At the same time, again, it was a massive farm bill that really has pushed growers to be able to guarantee a return as long as they grow rice. They're going to plant to defend their base acres, which is a very complicated thing I won't get into unless you'd like to have a private conversation. But basically, the growers get a subsidy for rice, and it's a guaranteed win. Even if the market goes down, they're guaranteed a couple $100 an acre, which is just going to enhance this oversupply, grow high-yielding, low-quality variety situation. We've seen it in other countries before with intervention programs. The U.S. is just struggling from something we've seen in other places. And at some point, this balance of massive stocks is going to affect price. It's going to make the U.S. have to try to compete for some of the sales in Africa and other locations, which means a dramatic price drop. And I think that's what we're headed for. A lot of guys believe the wetness in the U.S. And the dryness in Asia is going to have a price run. That's actually some people, not a lot. It may, but I remain under the fact that you have to watch the weakness in the overall market. We said this in Dubai. I said this in my speech this week. People are underestimating how low prices can go on this level of supply. It might not. These weather events may limit the move, but they're massively underestimating the risk of what could happen as everybody wants to sell and can't. And you're not seeing a lot of players be able to sell, and you have these new entrants, China, Myanmar, Brazil, Peru. Everybody's entering, trying to sell at a time there's just not a lot of demand. You're going to run markets down on over competition, and that's what I worry about in everything. not just rice, but rice specifically has a very high supply. And when the dynamics start to move against it, it is dramatic, because you just will have a difficult time holding your inventories and not being able to sell. So all of you have seen this before. I would just maybe end with this graph, just because we're going quite long in time. I've showed this many times. This is my China graph on rice. Even with the imports and exports, heavy exports last year, China increased their stocks for 2018-19 by 4 million metric tons. I've said this many times. You have to look. The Chinese are carrying nearly 80% of their yearly consumption. So if they didn't have a crop, they'd have 80% of the year if they had no crop. That's how high the overall stocks are, which means they're going to take years, if this data is true, which it relatively must be within some degree, years to get rid of the stocks. And you have to question, why are they carrying it? Is it strategic? Is it they wanted to be able to control the world grain market? Because the reality is China could be the biggest world trader of rice easily. They could control the flow of imports and exports of grain right now in ways they never have before. That potential is in this market, and that's what this shows me. You need to watch them extremely close, both the amount they're willing to export, their slowness and timing of imports. They've just been extremely smart in this market and the soybean market. I do believe right now they are really in the control of the overall grain food price direction, and therefore they got to be watched very closely. With that, if I said any more, I think I would just be repeating myself. I would, of course, like to invite all of our friends to the World Conference in the Philippines on November 11th to the 13th. We're already having great excitement. We're working on some new parties coming, even bring some research as a side piece outside of the conference to be able to bring some of the more intellectual professors from around the world and talk about the direction of sustainability in rice. And obviously we're going to have a great time, many good talks, many good times. And I would just book early, because I would expect this is going to be one large and one fun world conference. We're also throwing the August 1st beer and rice event. It looks to be fascinating and awesome. We already have several hundred people coming for that event. There's going to be a rice beer contest. There's going to be a lot of fun, tours of the California rice industry. And really, it's a reunion of our rice friends from around the world. So if you're able, come take a break and enjoy the California weather. Come down on August 1st, maybe even July 28th, 27th, and come see the area. With that, I don't think I have much else to share. I just want to thank you guys all for your time. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. With that, I'll talk to you next week.